So today is the second installment of reacting to Christian Tik Toks. I think this is going to be an interesting and fun video. So let's get into it. Let's start with this first one. It's titled, "Is Evolution a Religious Theory?"
Christian Red, why don't you believe in evolution? There's so much empirical evidence for it. That's a great question, Atheist Red. So my biggest problem is that the empirical evidence that Darwin proposed in his landmark book has so many theological assumptions built into it. And instead of using this evidence to actually provide support for his evolutionary theory, instead he attempts to refute the alternative creation theory. What theological assumptions are you talking about? Evolution only focuses on what's empirically demonstratable. Well, the main one I'm talking about is what's known as utilitarianism, and that basically asserts that every structure that an organism has to serve a functional need. So the faulty assumption that Darwin makes is that if God did create the world, he would have had to do so according to utilitarian principles without the possibility of creating for beauty, variety, or even delight.
This is a very confusing video at first. I had to rewatch it a couple times. So basically what he's saying is that Darwin assumes that God must create in a manner where every particular characteristic of an organism has a function. And yes, I agree that this is an assumption that is made, but then we have to ask ourselves, what best fits the evidence? The theory of evolution or creation? Does it make more sense that God created rudimentary pelves on organisms like whales and snakes, or that their ancestors, from an evolutionary perspective, previously had legs? What explanation better fits that evidence? So really, to be coherent in your position on this, you have to also not only assume that God created all these organisms, but that the earth is very young, because if God created them with certain features that are not advantageous or that are unnecessary, they're going to get weeded out through evolution no matter what. Evolution is still going to occur if God created the organisms or not. Two separate things. Okay, this next one I just think is funny, and that's the only reason why I'm including it. So yeah, okay. Like, I get what they're saying here is that at tough times, God might not be right with you in that, but he has prepared you for it. My only critique of this, and I know this is not supposed to be like an academic TikTok, but my critique is, where's the teaching part, right? Where is God when you need to ask him questions prior to the test, right? He's not available for any of that. You can't go and talk to him. I just think that it's kind of a shitty analogy is all, and kind of funny. So this next TikTok, I literally thought was a joke at first, but after looking at this guy's page, he's legit. So let's take a look at it. So this is a very common argument, the whole first cause thing. The only difference really between this guy and me is that I'm not going to assume that just because we don't know something, a divine being did it. A whole video could be dedicated, a whole video series, an entire lifetime could be dedicated to the Big Bang. But the reality is there's no consensus on the Big Bang. There's no consensus on what came before that. So to claim that it's God is just like claiming that it was nothing. We don't know. And I'm not going to, advocate for a certain side, because again, I don't think that we know right now, obviously, and I'm not even sure if it's possible to know. I think that's the only reasonable position to take. Also, I want to highlight this is something that has come up in the past and doesn't bode well for religion. At first, it was lightning that, was created from the hand of God. But eventually science caught up and was like, no, the lightning is not from God. We can explain it. They continually put God in like a different box, and eventually science will get there if it's possible. The Earth is a perfect distance from the sun. We've all heard this too, the Goldilocks zone. This is great, but it's perfect distance from the sun for us specifically as organisms based on carbon. But we're not the only possible means for life, if that makes sense. We're not the only possible way that life could have formed. Life is going to form to its environment. And so if it lives in an environment where there's little to no water, or it's extremely cold, the animals or organisms that develop in that environment are going to develop to survive in that environment. They're not going to develop to survive on Earth. And then on top of that, there are other planets, even our solar system, that we have looked at because we think it's possible that life could live on them, right? Think of, I want to say like Saturn Maybe Jupiter has a moon called Europa that was, for a long time, they're like, if life is going to exist anywhere else in the solar system, it's going to be there. And so even in our own solar system, we have planets, or we have planetary bodies that could potentially support life. And think of the entire universe. There are billions of these planets that exist in the Goldilocks zone. We're not that rare, if that makes sense. Lastly, beauties and intricacies. So beauty, very subjective. I mean, it's like one of the most subjective things. Look at any painting or any work of art, music, for example. It changes, the opinion on it changes between people, changes between time periods. They claim that because something is beautiful, it must be created by God. Really, you have to first prove that it's objectively beautiful before you can even assert that God created it. And then intricacies can be explained through evolution. I won't get into it as I have videos on this channel to talk about it, but successive small little changes with anything. Obviously, this goes for literally everything that we do. The accumulation of these little steps that we take to create things, for example, lead to its intricacies, or it being an intricate thing. I would argue that evolution is doing just that same thing. And of course, if you're arguing that everything is created on the basis that it's beautiful and intricate, I would assume that you appreciate God's beauty and intricacies. And so how come God does not need to be created if your standard for creation is that it's beautiful and intricate? So the last one I want to talk about, I think is actually a good and interesting topic. I just call it the colonial myth. So let's look at it.
If you're Desi, let me ask you this. What is one colonial myth you wish would stop persisting?
That to be a follower of Christ in South Asia is to somehow endorse colonialism. In other words, to be a Christian as a South Asian, a Sri Lankan, Indian, or Desi person is to adopt the religion of the colonizer. But the religion of the colonizer and the way of Jesus are two different things. The former is a bastardized, weaponized, dehumanizing, otherizing version of the latter.
So honestly, I agree with a lot of what he says. It's not inherently bad to adopt something from the culture of your colonizer. The colonizer, although they are colonizing you and they're doing something that is perceived as obviously bad, it doesn't mean that everything they're doing is inherently bad because of that. But the reality is the colonizers, the sexists, the homophobic, the racists, people supporting slavery, they're all reading these exact same texts and coming out with different conclusions. And so in my opinion, and I did a video on this recently, you can't separate them. Just because you find what you perceive as the positive things in Christianity and spread that message, it doesn't mean that Christianity is devoid of negatives. There are absolutely negative things that can be weaponized and used to do horrid things. And this has been done throughout history many times over. And ultimately, you can't separate those two things. You can't, out of one mouth, support slavery, and then out another mouth from a different adherent, support no slavery or equal rights. It just doesn't make sense. And I believe that Christianity in particular and religions at large need to be held accountable for both of these things. If I'm a leader, if I'm a God, let's say, and I'm telling people what to do, and my message is so ambiguous that it can be used to do the exact opposite of what I'm saying, that's my fault. That's not the people listening to me. That's not their fault. If I can't come out and say and be clear that my religion does not support slavery, if that is not a clear message in my worldview, in my morals, in my religion, then it shouldn't be a religion. This type of thinking, in my opinion, is kind of toxic. It's just immediately let me find somebody to blame that isn't God, that isn't the Bible, that isn't Jesus, that isn't the church. It's always, oh, it's somebody else's fault. I'm right. It's somebody else's fault. But I wonder when reality will set in with people that, you know what, this is a very ambiguous text that can be taken many different ways and will for eternity, and it can be weaponized. And that's an inherent characteristic of that text. Okay, I already went too into detail on that. I have another video and I'll link it or put a little card in the video if I remember, and you can go watch it. But I do want to mention one more thing before I end this video, is that I'm getting close to 250 subscribers. Let's go. And I want to do a special video, like a Q&A video. And I just decided to put it at the end of this video because I think it'll be released close to the time where I have 250 subscribers. And so if you have a question, it could be about anything. It could be about religion. It could be about my life in general, education, anything like that. I'm open for whatever. Leave them down in the comment section below on this video. If you put on a different video, I guess that's fine too. I will eventually find it. But yeah, anything is on the table. Ask about anything, and I'll release that video when I am at 250, and as long as I have like a solid amount of questions. But until then, I will see you on the next one, and thank you for watching this one.